Well, what comes to your mind when you hear the word welfare? Well, typically, people tend to think of someone who is subsisting on government cheese and perhaps someone who sits at home all day watching daytime TV, dealing with her illegitimate babies. Others might imagine a minority family in line at Walmart, fumbling for their EBT card. The truth is, the culture has defined in our mind what a traditional welfare queen is. And while taxpayer angst is understandable, especially in those cases where you have people who do not want to work but are willing to receive government benefits, there is really a much greater problem at work that many people do not see because the corporate-controlled media cleverly protects it from their eyes. And what I'm referring to is corporate welfare, or welfare for the rich. Today I want to give you 5 different examples of corporate welfare. And I'm drawing from an excellent article that actually contains 10 examples of welfare for the rich and corporations by Professor Bill Quigley, a law professor in New Orleans, who has penned an excellent piece that we've placed a link to on our website. We don't have time to get into all 10 examples, but we're going to talk about 5 of them here in this segment. As Quigley writes, there are actually thousands of tax breaks and subsidies for the rich and corporations provided by federal, state, and local governments. And somehow he was able to whittle it down just to 10. Well, we're going to just take the 5 best of these and go through them. Number 1 are state and local subsidies to corporations. Professor Quigley references a study released by the New York Times written by Louise Story that revealed the tens of billions of dollars that are spent on corporate subsidies by state and local governments each and every year. According to the report, which we have a link to on our website entitled As Companies Seek Tax Deals, Governments Pay High Price, Story writes, a Times investigation has examined and tallied thousands of local incentives granted nationwide and has found that states, counties, and cities are giving up more than $80 billion each year to companies. The beneficiaries come from virtually every corner of the corporate world, encompassing oil and coal conglomerates, technology and entertainment companies, banks, and big box retail chains. The cost of the awards is certainly far higher. A full accounting, the Times discovered, is not possible because the incentives are granted by thousands of government agencies and officials, and many do not know the value of all their awards. Nor do they know if the money was worth it because they rarely track how many jobs are created. Even where officials do track incentives, they acknowledge that it is impossible to know whether the jobs would have been created without the aid. The report really lifts the veil on the competitive nature that local governments face in dealing with these corporate subsidies. The report says states compete with other states, cities compete with surrounding suburbs, and even small towns have entered the race with the goal of defeating their neighbors. For many communities, the payouts add up to a substantial chunk of their overall spending, the analysis found. Oklahoma and West Virginia give up amounts equal to about 1/3 of their budgets, and Maine allocates nearly 1/5. As Quigley reports, over 48 big corporations received over $100 million each. GM was the biggest at a total of $1.7 billion extracted from 16 different states. But Shell, Ford, and Chrysler all received over $1 billion each. Amazon, Microsoft, Prudential, Boeing, and casino companies in Colorado and New Jersey received well over $200 million each. The second example of corporate welfare are direct federal subsidies to corporations. After all, it's not just state and local governments that are handing out taxpayer dollars to big business. According to Tad DeHaven at the Cato Institute, who is a friend of the program and has actually been a guest on this show, corporate welfare and the federal budget cost taxpayers almost $100 billion per year. According to Mr. Haven, while corporate welfare may be popular with policymakers who want to aid home state businesses, it undermines the broader economy and transfers wealth from average tax-paying households to favored firms. Corporate welfare also creates strong ties between politicians and business leaders, and these ties are often the source of corruption scandals in Washington. Americans are sick and tired of crony capitalism, and the way to solve the problem is to eliminate business subsidy programs." Unquote. The truth is, any politician who claims to support the virtues of limited government and personal responsibility, and yet at the same time approves of corporate welfare, is clearly a confused person. This is especially true of those political leaders who constantly warn of the evils of wealth redistribution, who all the while remain silent as billions of taxpayer dollars flow from the pockets of the working poor and middle class to the billionaire class. You see, when money flows from the rich to the poor, it's called socialism. Yet when money flows from the poor to the corporations, it's called capitalism. As you can see, Washington is in the business of redistributing wealth. If Congress is going to redistribute wealth, which direction do you think that money should flow? From the rich to the poor, or from the poor to the rich? You can download the entire policy analysis briefing from the Cato Institute, by the way, on our website in today's show notes. The third example of corporate welfare are federal tax breaks for corporations. According to a 2013 report released by the independent and nonpartisan U.S. Government Accountability Office, otherwise known as the GAO, the U.S. tax code awards corporations with special tax breaks to the tune of $200 billion every single year. Proponents of slashing the federal corporate income tax rate constantly refer to the current nominal rate of 35% before state taxes as being far too high. However, thanks to a tremendous number of corporate tax loopholes, the GAO has discovered that in 2010, the effective or actual tax rate for the average U.S. corporation was a mere 13%. These corporate tax loopholes cost the American taxpayer approximately $200 billion every year, which could have otherwise been spent on education, the elderly, veterans, and many other underfunded causes. Even more alarming, the GAO reports that its 2008 study on corporate income tax liabilities found that nearly 55% of all large U.S.-controlled corporations reported no federal tax liability in at least 1 year between 1998 and 2005. Allowing profitable corporations to pay zero in taxes even as the working poor and middle class struggle to afford the most basic of necessities is proof that our politicians have been sold to the highest bidders. That full report by the GAO, by the way, is available on our website for download in today's show notes. The fourth example of corporate welfare or welfare for the rich are federal tax breaks for wealthy hedge fund managers. Only in Washington would it make sense for mega-rich Wall Street fat cats to have a lower effective tax burden than the middle class. Yet today, thanks to a tax provision known as carried interest, hedge fund managers are able to have much of their income taxed at the capital gains rate, which is currently just under 24%, instead of the ordinary income rate, which would be much higher. According to the National Priorities Project, 68% of those who qualify for this special tax break earn more than $462,500 per year. Billionaire U.S. investor Warren Buffett has been rather vocal on this topic. In 2010, it was reported that Buffett paid only 11% of his income in taxes. Meanwhile, Buffett's secretary paid more than 30% of her income in taxes during the same year. In 2011, Buffett expressed his concern, saying that he believed that it was wrong for the uber-rich like himself to pay less in federal taxes as a portion of their income than those in the middle class.
The truth is that if you take you can go to the internet and you can get this printout. I've even got it here, and it lists a lot of figures for the 400 highest incomes in the United States, and it goes back to 1992. And since 1992, the average income of the 400 highest incomes has gone from 40-odd million to 220-odd million, five-fold. During that time, their tax rate as a percentage of taxable income has fallen from 29% down to 21%. That counts payroll taxes and income taxes. And I took this survey in my office. I did it 4 years ago, and everybody in the office was over 30% combined payroll taxes and income taxes. So I would just like the people who average 220 million in this case to start paying taxes at a rate that's more or less comparable to what people pay in our office. Now, that would not change many of the people at the top. A lot of people are paying it on ordinary income, and they are in the 30s. But there are a lot of people like me that get most of their money from dividends and capital gains, and we're down around 15 or so. In fact, there are a number of people that are below 15 that are making over a couple $100 million a year, believe it or not. I just say get those people up into the 30s. We just had I'm not supposed to mention it here, but the Forbes 400 just came out, and the aggregate wealth of the Forbes 400 this year was over $1.5 trillion. That's up sevenfold in the last 25 years, from 200 million roughly 25 years ago. That is not what the American public has experienced. So the disparity is growing wider and wider in this country, and we're going to talk about shared sacrifice. We're going to go to the American public and say we've got $1.2 trillion difference between receipts and expenditures. So we're going to ask something from all of you. We're going to ask people to give up some promises that have been made to them in the past that are going to have to be modified in the future. We're going to ask 300 million Americans plus to tighten their belts one way or another and help us get our fiscal house in order. And to ask them something like that when the super rich in many cases are paying 20 points less in terms of taxes to the federal government, I think is just plain wrong. It doesn't solve our budget problem. What I suggest would probably raise about $20 billion annually from about 50,000 people. But $20 billion is $1,000 each to 20 million families. And if I've got a choice of getting $1,000 from 20 million families throughout this country that are already struggling, or getting 20 billion by asking people to pay taxes in the range of the 30s, just like everybody else is in this country, I'd rather go to the ultra rich.
So it's known as the Buffett rule, and he seeks to raise taxes on those uber rich. And again, he defines that as probably affecting 50,000 individuals in the country of 300 plus million. Now, it's amazing how the corporate-controlled mainstream media has convinced wide sections of the American people, mainly middle class and the working poor, that it is not in their best interest for corporations and for the uber rich to actually have to pay their fair share of taxes. If you're in my listening audience today and you are part of that top 0.1%, then you have every single right to oppose what Buffett is saying. Makes total sense. It's in your best interest not to pay more in taxes. But for those in the audience who are earning, say, $50,000, $60,000 a year, or you're just in the middle class, and you oppose the idea of the rich paying their fair share, you have to ask yourself, how did I get convinced of that? Because that is actually not in my own self-interest. You see, according to economics and according to Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, penned The Wealth of Nations back in the 1770s, he basically taught that the economy works when everybody moves according to their own self-interest. He calls it the invisible hand, that everybody is moving according to their own self-interest. And what has happened today is that the corporate-controlled media, because it's controlled by corporations who want to pay less taxes, they have been very successful at convincing the American public as being their guardian, as being their protector. And so what you find today is many working class people, those in the middle class, have been taught through the mainstream media, through the corporate-controlled media, to view the poor as the primary cause of their problems and the cause of the problems in the country, not the corporations. It's all very telling. Now, number 5. The number 5 example of corporate welfare are subsidies to the fast food industry. According to a mind-blowing study produced by the University of Illinois, U.S. taxpayers provide nearly $243 billion each year in indirect subsidies to the fast food industry. Why? Because employees of the fast food industry are paid such low wages that they and their entire households instantly qualify for government benefits, including Medicaid, food stamps, the Earned Income Tax Credit, and temporary assistance for needy families, which is a formal way of saying welfare. The study estimates the cost of these 4 programs for working families at $243 billion per year from 2007 to 2011. According to the study, more than half, 52%, of the families of frontline fast food workers are enrolled in one or more public programs, compared to 25% of the workforce as a whole. The study also found that even full-time hours are not enough to compensate for low wages. The families of more than half of the fast food workers employed 40 hours or more per week were still enrolled in public assistance programs because they qualified. So in essence, this is really a corporate subsidy when you think about it, because the fast food industry is able to pay its workers poverty type of wages. And then the communities there are then responsible for footing the bill for the government benefits that those employees instantly qualify for because of those low wages. And it's not just the fast food industry that's to blame. Low-paying retail outlets like Walmart are also costing U.S. taxpayers a fortune in subsidized costs. The truth is, in state after state, one of the largest group of Medicaid recipients are Walmart employees. According to one report, each Walmart associate costs the taxpayers in that community an average of more than $1,000 in public assistance. One of the unintended consequences of low wages is that it ends up costing government because workers seek food stamps and other aid which they instantly qualify for. And who funds that? Of course, you and I, the taxpayer. So it's really a corporate subsidy that you and I have to pay in the end. So there's really a lot to think about in all of this. Here are the 5 different examples of corporate welfare. We could go on. We could, of course, talk about the government bailout of Wall Street, where $7 to $9 trillion was dumped by the Federal Reserve into banks and financial firms and investors across the world. We could talk about specific industries that receive very, very lucrative subsidies from taxpayers, including the energy industry and the pharmaceutical industry. We could talk about the subsidies for corporate jets, which cost taxpayers well over $3 billion per year, or the many billionaires who receive taxpayer-funded farm subsidies. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. The truth is, corporate welfare is one of the largest problems facing our nation and our economy. And until we, the American people, demand that Washington put an end to it, it's going to continue to be a major problem affecting us all. All that is except for the uber-rich who benefit from this perverse system. So the next time somebody around you complains about government benefits being paid out to the working poor, just remind them that for every dollar that they spend in taxes helping the poor with food stamps, they're also spending more than $20 in corporate subsidies and tax breaks. Now you tell me, who's America's real welfare queen?